Between 2013 and 2015, over $100 million disappeared from Google and Facebook. Not through a hack and not through malware or some network infiltration. It was all done through email. A Lithuanian man named Evaldas Ramasauskis did this all from his laptop. Both companies buy from the same vendor, Quanta Services or Quanta Computer, a company based in Taiwan. They build data center infrastructure, servers, and physical hardware that runs the data centers. All specialized equipment, expensive. And both Google and Facebook needed constant shipments of new hardware, replacements, and upgrades. It was a regular part of doing business at this scale. Quanta Computer is the kind of vendor that would appear in their accounting system month after month after month. And Evaldas started by doing what any thorough criminal would do. He researched. He looked at how these companies operated, and he found Quanta. He understood that if an invoice came from Quanta, the finance departments at Google and Facebook wouldn't immediately question it. It was a known vendor, a trusted one, and part of their normal business flow. So he decided to become Quanta by creating not the exact domain, but something close to it, like Quanta.com, instead of Quanta, the real one. It was close enough that if you glanced at it in your inbox, you wouldn't catch the difference. Your brain would autocorrect it. You'd see Quanta and just move on. But he didn't stop there. He set up an actual website with logos and branding, company information, contact pages. If you looked at the site, you would see exactly what you'd expect to see. It felt like Quanta. And then he started sending invoices. And these weren't generic invoices. They were professional, very detailed. They had invoice numbers that followed real accounting conventions. They had project codes that matched actual work that Google and Facebook were doing. They referenced specific hardware purchases, server builds, network components, the kind of work that actually was happening at these companies. And the amounts were always specific too. They weren't rounded numbers, not $1 million. It was like $475,000 here, $600,020 here, $800,000. These invoice amounts made sense for the work that was being described. They looked legitimate because they were supposed to. And here's part of the reason why this was able to work. At a company the size of Facebook or Google, you're not dealing with one finance person who personally knows every vendor or every account number. You're dealing with hundreds of people across different departments, different teams, different locations. Finance people in Dublin, finance people in Mountain View, and a finance team in New York. They're all processing thousands of transactions. They don't know whether this specific wire should go to account A or account B. They're just doing their job. They're seeing an invoice from a known vendor, and the email looks right at a quick glance. The format looks right. The project codes match, and the budget line has been approved. There's no immediate red flag. So they authorize the transfer, and the money moves. Evaldas was targeting specific people at both companies, the people in finance departments. These people had access to authorization systems. These people handled vendor payments. He did lots of research on these people. He found their email addresses, and he figured out when they were likely to be processing invoices. And then he sent them one. Between 2013 and 2015, he sent dozens of these, maybe more. Some went through immediately, and some sat in someone's inbox for a few days before being processed. But the money kept moving, and the wire transfers kept happening. Hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time, sometimes millions, all going to accounts that he controlled. So all of this money was being moved out of two of the largest companies in the world. They moved through normal payment systems. They were approved by actual employees doing their jobs, quote unquote, correctly. For 2 years, this worked. It was 2 years of transfers of money sitting in accounts across Eastern Europe while Google and Facebook continued with their business completely unaware. But one day, someone at one of these companies was doing a routine financial audit. They were just going through the books, checking transactions, and they saw something off, an invoice that didn't match their actual records with Quanta. Maybe it was a wire that went to an unusual account that caught their eye, but it was just something off enough for them to pull a thread. And when they looked closer, everything started to unravel. The domains didn't match perfectly. The website associated with the email wasn't the real Quanta site at all. They checked the wire transfer information, and the accounts weren't in the US. They were in Cyprus, in Latvia, and other countries. Quanta Computer is based in Taiwan. So if it's not going to Taiwan or the US, this is a huge red flag. And that's when it clicked. Someone realized that they had been systematically defrauded. They reported it, and law enforcement got involved. The FBI opened up an investigation, and they started tracing the money. They followed wire transfers through multiple jurisdictions, and they watched the funds move from bank to bank. Some of it was in Cyprus, some of it was in Latvia. The trail was really complex. The money had been deliberately scattered. And meanwhile, investigators were trying to figure out who had done this. They were looking at the spoof domains and the fake websites, the sophistication of the invoices. It was clear that this wasn't an amateur. This was someone who understood how these large corporations operated and someone who did extensive research. They started looking at who registered these fake domains and who set up these bank accounts. They worked with law enforcement all around the globe, and the trail led back to Lithuania, to Evaldas Rimasauskis. When law enforcement finally caught up with him, they found him in his hometown. And by that point, most of the money was already gone. The investigations traced maybe a couple $1 million here, tens of $1 million over there, but that's all they could recover. The rest had been scattered. Some had moved through additional banks. Some had been converted to other currencies. And a lot of it was probably spent. Evaldas was arrested, and he was extradited to the United States. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud and money laundering in 2017, and he was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. But here's what actually matters, and here's what people should be paying attention to. The technique or scheme that Evaldas used isn't unique, and it's not some one-off case study. This is something that's happening constantly. It's happening all the time. It happens right now, every single day, and it's not rare. It's not unusual. It's called business email compromise, or BEC for short. And the scale of it is pretty staggering. The FBI's 2024 Internet Crime Report found that companies lost $2.9 billion to BEC attacks last year alone. $2.9 billion every single year. And the number keeps climbing. That's more than $100 million a month, every month, going to criminals through fake emails and spoof vendors and invoices that look real. And that's just what gets reported to the FBI. The actual numbers is probably a lot higher. A lot of companies don't report these attacks because they're embarrassed and they're trying to save face. They don't want the publicity. They don't want regulators or investors knowing that they got tricked by a fake email or hacked. They'd rather eat the loss because it might be cheaper than paying legal fines. BEC attacks happen in almost every industry: healthcare, manufacturing, finance, tech, real estate. It doesn't matter. If you process vendor payments, you're a target. If your organization does business with external companies, you're vulnerable. The attacks take on different forms. Sometimes it's someone pretending to be the CEO. They send an urgent email to someone in their finance department saying, "Hey, I need wire funds immediately." They pose as a high-level executive asking for discretion from a low-level analyst in the finance department. They say, "Don't tell accounting, just do it. These this trick works more often than you'd think because they exploit urgency and authority. Sometimes it's a compromised vendor email. Like a vendor's email gets hacked and they send a quote unquote update to their customer saying, "Hey, we've changed our banking information. Please update your records. Here's the new account number for future invoices." And their customer companies update it. They process the payments to the new account, and the real vendor doesn't realize what happened until they notice that they're not getting paid. And sometimes it's exactly what Evaldez did, just mimicking a trusted vendor, sending professional invoices and waiting for the transfers. The common thread is that none of these attacks require a heavy amount of technical sophistication. We're not dealing with zero-day exploits. It's just social engineering and understanding how a business operates and then inserting yourself in that process. These attacks are incredibly hard to prevent, especially if you don't have the right controls in place. Because the fundamental problem isn't security, it's process, it's the way organizations handle payments. But it is solvable by implementing certain processes, basic controls, like dual approval on any wire transfer above a certain amount. If it's $50,000 or more, you need two people to sign off on it. You need two independent reviews. They check the vendor information and confirm the account numbers. They look at the email addresses critically instead of just assuming it's right. Independent verification by actually calling the vendor directly before authorizing a payment. Using a phone number from an official trusted record and not a phone number from the email you received or the invoice. The person who initiates a payment shouldn't be the same person who authorizes it. The person who receives the invoice shouldn't be the only one reviewing it. You create a system where fraud requires multiple people being complicit or fooled. You got to add friction to the process. And none of these are fancy security controls. They're just basic process controls. They do slow things down, but they force a second pair of eyes and a second brain to actually verify what's happening. And this works. The companies that have implemented these controls, they're less likely to get hit by a BEC scam. Or if they do, the attack fails. The fraud gets caught before it becomes a problem. But most companies haven't implemented these, or they've did it in a half-heartedly way. And so they remain vulnerable, which is why BEC attacks continue and why $2.9 billion a year keeps disappearing. And it's why Evaldez Ramesauskas managed to steal over $100 million from two of the most sophisticated companies in the world, using nothing but fake emails and patience.